The wind atop the wall had 1,000 small hands and used them all. It worried at cloaks and hair, pried at the raw edges of breath, found every tiny seam in boiled leather and wool and pressed blue cold into the chinks. The wall itself groaned under that assault, old ice shifting on older ice, with a voice older than the north and deeper than the riverbeds frozen 100 feet down. In it John heard the sound of running water held still until spring, the squeal of hoists, the whisper of a snowflake's fall striking adrift. That sound had become the language of his nights. Ghost moved as a pale streak along the merlins, silent as the wind, his eyes 2 coals buried in snow, his prints filled with rhyme as soon as he lifted his paws. When he glanced back, John understood him without words. Not the same, something changed. The wolf's head lifted, drank at the night, then turned toward the lift tower that clattered and swayed, as if the ice knew a rider approached long before any horse. John pulled his glove off with his teeth and pressed fingertips to the top of the stone-crusted parapet. The cold bit so sharply it almost felt warm. Sensation fled and left awareness behind, a clean emptiness. He had learned to think within that emptiness. He had learned to hear things that were not sound. The weight of snow in the air, the shift of clouds, a dimness in the moonlight like a thought crossing the face of a sleeping man. He wrapped his cloak tighter. A lantern swam up from the yard below like a firefly trapped in a jar. Men muttered at the base of the lift tower, boots crunching, someone laughing too loudly and then catching himself as if the cold might crack laughter and shards would cut them all. John watched the lantern bob as it rose, its light painting bars upon the ice, then upon the platform, then upon the night at his feet. The platform halted with a groan. The lantern swung. Rider from the east rode. Dywin called up, beard rimed white, red hair big as a bear, laughs like a barrel rolling downhill. Tormund, John said. Ghost's ears pricked. Even the wind seemed to pause, curious. The man who came out of the lift was wrapped in furs so thick he looked like a walking drift. He shook himself once and sent a glitter of frost into the air. Your wall whistles like a kettle, Tormund Giant's bane boomed, thumping the ice with a mittened fist. Careful it doesn't boil over. There is no fire in it to boil, John said. Welcome to Castle Black. Welcome, Tormund echoed, tasting the word as if it were new. You crow boys and your manners. I remember you, the wolf with a man attached. Ghost came forward and stood where the torchlight licked the edge of shadow. Tormund's laugh softened. He remembers me too. Well met, White Shadow. A dozen black brothers had come with the lantern, and they watched with hands on hilts, eyes hard above scarves. There were scars here from raids and dead brothers stacked in their memory like cordwood. The wildling before them had been father to some of those scars. John lifted a hand. He comes under a flag of truce, he said. Lay down the edge. Blades went back into sheaths. The sound was not friendly. The wind carried a few unkind breaths away. Truce, Tormund said, as if it were another new word. And you called me. At the edge of the world, a crow boy sends word. Come alone. I almost came with 300. Thought to show you alone how much alone can do. I asked for you because you have sons and grandsons, John said, and because when they speak of winter fires in the snow, your laughs do not hide the way your hand strays to your axe. Tormund studied him, then stamped his boots, the heavy soles thudding upon the frost. I came because I like the shape of your madness, Snow. I'm too old to be bored to death by sense. What do you want? He lifted his head and sniffed. And where's the one ear who sneers like a frostbite? I'd speak to the man who thinks himself the wall made flesh. Ser Alistair is on the Shadow Tower. John lied with the ease of practice. The truth was Alistair Thorne would have derailed the talk before it began. The Lord Commander will see you. After that, you'll see me. Tormund's breath smoked the air. He wagged his beard. You and your wolf. Let's see if what you've called me for is worth the snot frozen in my whiskers. They walked along the top of the wall. Beneath them the world vanished into white and black. Fields of frozen air, treetops stiff as spearheads. The long smear of the King's Road like a scar that never healed. The lantern bobbed. Ghost trotted ahead and paused where the stairway cut down into the ice like a wound, and John remembered descending into the heart of the wall when he was green as spring, and how the ice had a smell like old stone and deep water and dead candles. They came out into the yard where watchfires burned low to keep them from drawing arrows. Men's faces were a row of red ovals above scarves. An owl called once from the rookery and was answered by a raven with a sound like laughter. Tormund sniffed again. "Your crows smell of pitch and fear and onions," he said cheerfully. "Come then, old bear, show me your claws." Jeor Mormont looked no more a bear than he had when John first saw him, which was to say, the same old rage had hollowed grooves around his mouth. The same stubborn patience sat in his eyes as if patience were a kind of power. His cloak was raven black and lined in shadow. He dismissed most of the men in the common hall with a flick of his fingers. After the benches had scraped and the door banged, only John, Tormund, Dywyn, and one silent steward remained, his back to the fire where a pot of something that pretended to be stew murmured. "Giant's bane," Mormont said, "if that is what you are." "If that is what I am," Tormund agreed. "And you're the old bear who sends chits into the woods for parley when his house is made of ice." Mormont's eyes did not blink. "Jon Snow tells me you sometimes make sense when you are not making jest. Are you ready to hear something that is not jest?" "Speak it," Tormund said. Mormont nodded toward Jon. The words had been rolling in Jon's head for days like stones in a river. When he spoke them, he spoke slowly, because to rush them felt like insulting the truth. "The dead walk," he said. "Not stories. Not the old woman's supper tales. Not shadows born of fear. I fought them at the fist of the first men. I saw my brothers cut down by corpses that rose again with blue fire in their eyes. Fire kills them. Dragonglass kills them. Iron and courage do not. You crows have fought the dead since the first girl lay with the first man," Tormund said, but he said it without heat. "I've seen strange things in my time too." "Have you seen a man you knew rise again with frost cracking his beard and try to kill you with your name still on his lips?" Jon asked. He tried to keep the edge from it. Something in him always went sharp when skepticism met what he had carried out of that night. Tormund shifted his weight, and the boards complained. "I've seen snows that would bury a cow standing and men who lay down and never rose. Not for a day, not for a night, not for a year. The world steals a man in many ways. This way is one. But speak on, lad." "The free folk run," Jon said. "They run in ones and twos, in bands that call themselves clans, in 100,000 arguments with legs. They run because you're not a king. You're a song that knows how to listen. A song cannot order a river. A king might command a bridge. Hardhome will draw every soul with the promise of fish and wood and old roofs, and the dead will find a feast set out neat." The name hung in the steamy air of the hall and pulled all the heat from it. Even Mormont's steward turned a little, as if he could hear words with his shoulder blades. Tormund scratched his cheek through his fur. "Hardhome," he said. "Agner the crowslayer camped there. They say the smoke from the fires once turned the sky black as a kettle. They say the shore eats ships when the wind's in the wrong quarter. They say many things. They say hunger is a voice that makes fools of pride," Jon said. "They will go where wood is and where fish are, and where an old roof is better than no roof at all. If they go, the dead will come. If they stay, the dead will come. The dead do not care about choices. They care only for the warmth in a body and the way it carries itself like a lantern across the dark." He leaned forward. "Bring them south, not as raiders, not as an enemy. Bring them as a people. Every clan, every family, all of them." Mormont's fingers tapped his cup, an old soldier's drum. Tormund smiled with half his mouth and showed 2 yellowed teeth. "And what a neat little bundle you ask us to tie. Every is a word big as a mountain. I've tried to herd hair. I have sons who can't be herded to their stools. Every," he chuckled. "You would have me call a moot, then? Send runners to the snows, to the caves, to the long shore where the walrus men grind seals with their teeth and drink blood like wine? You would have me tell Boric to stop chewing men's ears long enough to listen? You would have me talk the Ice River people out of their taste for men? You would have me take Styr's bronze from his hand and say, "Put this away, we're making clay pots now?" You'd have me unmake wildlings and make, what? Little crows? Make them neighbors, John said. The word sounded strange in his mouth, as if it had to be warmed to be believed. Let the wall be a bridge where it has been awound. Mormont snorted through his beard, a sound like stones rolled together. You would have me betray the vows. John turned to him. My Lord Commander, the vows say we are the shield that guards the realms of men. Men from where? From south of the last tree only? The dead do not ask for papers when they walk. They will take the north beyond the wall and the north beneath it the same. If we stand with no men at our backs, our shield will be a bowl and the dead will eat from it. Tormund rubbed his nose with a knuckle. You talk like a man who listened to old women and also to the wind, he said. I like a man who can do both, but what you ask is 3 things. First, it is work to call so many. Second, it is danger to gather them in one place. Third, if we come, your brothers will cut us down at the gate, and that will be the last joke of the world. John looked at Mormont. The old bear's eyes were on the fire. You could see thought move through him like the slow shift of floe ice in spring. Something weighty moving, scratching its back on the riverbed, hunting the channel where it might pass. At last he reached down, lifted a pothook, and stirred the stew as if he might find an answer in the bottom. When he spoke, his voice was low. What if I say no? His eyes were like stones, age-sanded and stubborn. What if I say we are fewer than we should be, poorer than we should be, hungrier than we should be? What if I say every child you bring south will need bread and boots the watch cannot make out of air? Then the dead will not trouble themselves to argue, John said. They will answer for you. We cannot feed them all. We cannot clothe them all. But we can put 1,000 men with axes in the haunted forest cutting wood for huts. We can lay granaries in the abandoned villages of the gift that stood empty when I was a boy. We can trade old oaths for new ones. No raids south of the Bridge of Skulls. No slavs. Guest right kept. Tithes paid in work, not coin. The watch will take no part in the feuds of clan against clan. But we will feed the hungry when we can and show them where to feed themselves when we cannot. And we will teach them the things our fathers forgot to teach theirs. How to set beacons on the ridges, how to listen to the cold, how to make fires that last, how to set dragonglass into spear and arrow. Tormund's eyebrows climbed into his hair. Dragonglass, he said. You have some? John reached into the pouch at his belt and set the black blade on the board, where it drank the firelight. It looked like a sliver of night. Tormund touched it and hissed. Sharp, he said. The first men buried them at the fist, John said. We found them. They kill the dead. Fire kills them too, but fire is a river that dies with the wind. Dragonglass does not blow out. Mormont's mouth tightened. He reached, and the obsidian turned in his big fingers like a flake of frozen shadow. You would have me be a lord, he said, not without contempt. Dole out land, set tithes and tasks, manage quarrels. I am too old to play at being a little Royce in a black cloak. He set the blade down. Yet I am not so old I cannot see the shape of the thing. If you can convince them to come, if you can keep them from eating each other on the way, if you can do that, I will say the words on the gate to let them through. Not once, not 50 at a time to be cut down in the yard, but in their hundreds, with wagons if they have them, with children on their shoulders. I will do this thing once for you. If there is blood, it is your blood that will answer for it. John's breath left him and came again. He felt the coolness of it in his throat, like drinking winter. I will answer, he said. Tormund nodded slowly. If the old bear says he'll open, then I will call. I'll send the word out. The weeper will come because he likes the smell of trouble. Rattleshirt will come because he wants to see whether your dragonglass will rattle. Styr will come because he thinks he can take bronze and polish it to a crown. Harma would come if she were not dead. Salt take her. But her dogs will sniff at the edges. The Ice River folk will not come because they are ice beyond ice, but I'll try to tell them a story and see if they've learned to listen. The giants will come because they always come to a moot, to see whether men have learned not to shout. The thens will come because they have sense and no humor. Val will come because she does not like to be told where not to go. He grinned, and in it John saw the boy in the man for an instant, some wildling child with a stick sword and frost in his hair. And Mance will come because he wants to know how his song sounds when sung from inside your ice. Mance will come, John said, and the words made heat about his heart that did not wholly feel like comfort. He must. Must is the second lie we tell after always, Tormund said. But I'll carry the word. Mormont poured 3 cups with his big hand and pushed them across the board. The stew smelled of onions and the faintest memory of meat that might have once been rabbit. Drink, he said. Eat, then go. If we are to do this madness, we will do it quick before sense wakes up. They ate. The stew warmed John's teeth and made his ears ache less. Tormund blew into his own as if it were soup rather than stew and left a beard of steam on the cup rim. Ghost lay with his head on John's boot and dreamed, eyes flickering, paws twitching as if he ran along some invisible bank. Beyond the fire, the common hall was a cathedral of cold shadow. Men whispered at the door. The rafters creaked. The world held its breath and did not know it. After, under the stars, Tormund looked up at the wall as if considering whether he might pick it up and carry it. I'll want a horn, he said. You have one, John replied. Tormund reached into his furs and drew out a thing so cracked and wrapped in old rawhide that it might have been a goat's crooked leg. This is not the horn I mean, he said, chuckling. I'll want a long horn of truth, a signal. How will your men know which dark we are when we come in a snake for half a day? How will mine know which of yours to run toward when their guts are running the other way? Lift your horns on your towers when the gates are open. 3 long blows, and 1 short to say peace. John nodded. We'll teach the watchmen. We'll raise beacons. The Shadow Tower and Eastwatch will hear the same. Tell the sea crows to keep their ships near, Tormund said softly, almost to himself. Hardhome is hungry. Hungry men make rafts out of roofs. The word struck the frozen air again and hung there, a black moth pinned upon white. John looked east, though there was nothing to see but the suggestion of distance. Hardhome. He had read it in old ledgers and tattered letters, the records of levies and losses, the memory of a place the Night's Watch did not garrison and no lord claimed but fishermen remembered like a scar you learned to throw a shirt over. I'll send word to Cotter Pike, he said. He will not like it. Then I'll like it for him, Tormund said. Ive liked vers. They parted at the gate, a mouth in the ice in which the darkness had a taste like iron. Tormund clasped John's forearm, and John took his, and they looked at each other like 2 men standing on either side of a chasm they had decided to call a bridge. Then the old chains screamed, the ice door moved, and winter breathed out of the tunnel with a smell like old rain that had forgotten itself in stone. Tormund went into it, a moving mountain swallowed by cold. The door came down. The chains sighed and rattled like bones. John stood until he could not hear the step of the wildling any longer, not even in his mind. Madness? Dywin said, appearing at his shoulder with a grin that was mostly gums. I like a bit of madness when the world's too sane. The world is seldom that, John said. The next morning was thin as a blade. The light held no heat, but it held clarity enough to see ravens leap from the rookery roof and scatter like thrown seeds. Sam was in the library with ink on his fingers again, a book open like a gull's wing on the table. He looked up, blinked behind his slit spectacles, and pushed his hair back with a hand he had forgotten was black with ink. Is it true? He said without greeting. Is he here? He was, John said. He shut the door to keep out the river of cold trying the latch. He will call a moot. Sam made a noise like a kettle catching a boil. Sam, he said to himself. Calm, calm, calm. He had begun saying that lately as if naming composure would coax it forward. A moot, he said to John. Then you must go. You cannot send Dywin, or Gren, or PYP, or no. His mouth twisted. You must go, and I must find you the right words to carry on your back like a pack. John smiled despite the weight in him. Find me better than words, he said. Find me wind and rope. I need a way to carry dragonglass without breaking it. I need horn signals from the histories. I need maps of the long shore that are not lies told by men who never put a foot beyond a fish jetty. Sam's eyes lit. Maps, he said. We have maps drawn by men who drew maps instead of eating. We have maps drawn by men who ate and drew with greasy fingers. We have a letter from Maester Kenneth. Oh, he was a very precise man about the currents off the frozen shore, and he says the drift ice can move a ship faster than any oars if you know how to read the pressure lines. We have a treatise on horns, too, and bells. He frowned at a shelf. John, you have to promise me you will not blow the wrong horn or the wall will fall. I will leave the wrong horns to the singers, John said. He leaned over Sam's shoulder and looked at the map spread before him. It was an old thing scabbed with repairs and stitched with fine thread where a rip had been mended too carefully. The land beyond the wall was a suggestion, a rumor made ink. Rivers that did not exist ran like veins through white space. The names were both poetry and threat. Milkwater, Skirling Pass, the Frostfangs, the Weeping Forest. In the east, the coast curled like a claw, and there, like a splinter trapped in skin, was the word Hardhome. Sam tapped it with his inky finger, leaving a small black tear that would never come off. There, he said, as if John could not read. There. The old letters say the cliffs burn when lightning finds the pine. They say the harbor eats its own boats when the ice slumps in. They say the slope behind the town holds old bones, and the dogs dig them up when meat runs thin. You always have the cheeriest letters, John said.
Sam colored.
I read all there is to read, he said, a little stiff. And much of it is written by men who had no sense of what not to write. Keep reading, John said gently. Find me where the ice breaks first in spring. Find me mention of kingsmuts and how they keep men from cutting each other's throats for sport. Find me stories the free folk tell themselves when they are trying to be brave. Find me the old words for guest right and no raid in the old tongue if they are there, and if they are not, find me how to say it with hands and food and fires. Sam sat, and his shoulders rose a little, like a man stepping into water he fears and loves. I will, he said. John left him there among the books and the frost and went to the yard where men swung axes at poles as if the poles had wronged them. He watched long enough to see that they were warm, and then he watched longer until he could see what they did wrong when their breath grew smoke and their fingers went dumb. It was the oldest lesson. A man swings brave at the start and foolish at the end. He made a note to speak to Donal Noy's successor about it, and then remembered dully that Donal was dead and the forge belonged now to men who had never seen the sea. He walked to the forge anyway. The hammer fell and fell. The man who lifted it had arms like ropes and hair like a thatch of thatch, and sweat froze on his brows and made them glitter. Sare, he grunted without looking. He was not a Sare, and John was not, and both of them knew neither needed the correction. Sharp obsidian breaks, John said. They do not like iron. I need wood to bear them, tight-grained, and sinew to bind. Can you set 1,000 heads in a week? The hammer did not stop. If I had 1,000 heads, the man said. He lifted the iron in the tongs and it steamed. If I had 1,000 men who knew one end of a bow from the other and did not try to set arrowheads with mittens on. If I had would cut in autumn, not cut now with sap in it. If the hammer fell again, a ringing that bit the cold. Bring me the heads. Bring me the wood and the sinew. Bring me men who can work by a fire without burning their shadows on it. I'll set your 1,000. I'll bring you 5,000, John said. The hammer missed once and stuttered against the anvil. The man looked up then. In his eyes was the same thing John had seen in Torments. The place where a man kept a store of sense and also a cupboard where he hid madness to try on when logic grew old. Bring me 5,000, he said, and I'll kiss you on the mouth. He grinned. Not hard. John laughed for the first time that day. I'll bring you wood, he said more soberly. We'll cut it from the haunted forest. The wildlings will cut it, and we will pay them with bread and iron nails and the right to sleep near fire. You make a market at the end of the world, the smith said, returning to his hammer. Find me a good name for it. Markets do not work without names. John left the forge thinking of names. They kept coming to him: Bridge Market, Peace Yard, the Gift Fair. He rolled them between his teeth and spat them out. None tasted like a thing that would keep two men from killing each other when the wind shifted. By noon he was riding out with 12 scouts, Ghost on one side and the shadow of doubt on the other. The gate opened and he felt the same chill he always did under the ice, the old cold that was more idea than air. Beyond, the forest stood like a congregation of patient men. The sky was a sheet of tin hammered thin. Sound went up and came down a mile away. The snow fit to the land the way a shroud fits a body. They moved in a line. They did not speak unless they had something to put on the ground between them like bread. John listened to the horse beneath him, its lungs, its hooves crunching, the small complaint of leather. He watched Ghost drift away to the left and found him again by the red coals of his eyes. He watched the trees and learned their faces so he could tell when one had shifted, and he watched his men and learned their breathing. Tracks crossed theirs once, twice. Small feet dragging, larger feet carrying burdens, dogs. Then the prince spun into chaos as if a struggle had plowed the snow and then something larger had dragged something heavier away into the trees. They did not follow the drag. The world was full of drags. They came to White Tree at dusk, the pale bark of the enormous weirwood like a moon leaning its face into the clearing. The red leaves fluttered weakly, one or two at a time, as if embarrassed to be caught in winter. The hollow where men had left offerings was full of knucklebones and stones, and a feather that might have fallen there of its own accord or been placed by a hand that wished to say it had not. Ghost lay down and put his head on his paws and watched the tree with an attention so complete John felt like an eavesdropper. Night came up behind them and touched their shoulders. They lit a small fire under a bent pine that had kept a patch of ground clawed free of snow. John stood watch by the weirwood, feeling the old gaze on his cheek like the tracing of a wrinkled finger. He had dreamed beneath weirwoods before and had woken with the taste of sap in his mouth. He did not sleep now. He watched, and when a shape came out of the trees without sound except for the small complaint of snow underfoot, he had arrow to string in the time between two breaths. The shape lifted a hand. "Do not waste that," it said. "Mance?" John said, and the name came without surprise, as if the whole day had been walking toward it. The man who stepped into their weak firelight looked precisely like himself. A cloak sewn of oddments that made a pattern out of differences. A face that had wandered through 100 halls and learned to be welcome in each in a different way. A mouth too ready to sing and too ready to harden. He carried no instrument now, only a knife and a length of cord and a small satchel that could have held anything a man might need to run. His eyes were bright and careful. He was not alone. Shadows moved behind him and resisted the firelight like oil resists water. "Tormund called," Mance said. "When he calls, either something foolish or something important is walking toward you. Often both. He says you want to make a king out of a wall." "A bridge," John said. Mance smiled with half his mouth. "I have walked on bridges. They break when the river wants them to. I've walked on ice too. It breaks when it remembers it is water." He stepped closer, and the fire showed the scar at his throat that no one ever mentioned. "Take your hand off your bow, crow boy. If I wanted you dead, I'd have sent something with more legs." John did not smile. He unstrung the bow and lowered it. He could feel his men's eyes behind him like hot coins pressed to his back. Ghost did not growl. Mance measured the wolf and did not step nearer. "You've been south," John said. "You learned songs there. You learned what a long summer makes of men. You came back." He met the king beyond the wall's eyes. "Will you bring them?" Mance cocked his head. "Them. Everyone," John said. "Every clan. The Vens and the cave dwellers. The Ice River and the Walrus men. The giants with their mammoths. The ones who do not call themselves anything because no one has ever asked their name. Bring them to the wall. We open the gate. We let them through and settle them in the gift and beyond. We teach them what we know and they teach us what we forgot. We hold against the dead together." Mance squatted and warmed his hands. The gesture was very human, and it made him more dangerous. "You're young," he said in a voice as mild as the snow falling. You think old things can be unlearned in a winter. You think because you know a true thing about the dead that men will lay down false things about each other. You think you can call neighbor and make it so. I think the dead will not care what we think, John said. And when the dead do not care, men care less about the names they learned for their enemies. Mance looked into the fire. You think death is a... He searched for a word and found it after a small frown. Unifier. Yes, John said. And a judge. Mance rubbed his palms together. We had a judge once, he said, and his eyes went far. He was a crab in a pot with a crown on his shell. Men boiled him to see if the crown melted. It did not. He shook that away, neat as a dog shakes off rain. All right, little crow, I will call. I will send to Steer and to the Weeper. I will send to the Magner of Then, who has no humor. I will send to Borak, who has too much appetite. I will send to the giants and to the hare-footed and to the spearwives who dress their hair with bone. I will send to a woman called Mother Mole who walks the shore and sees visions in the ice. I will ask them to come to a place I will name. And then we will see whether men can come dressed as men rather than as the anger that owns them. Name the place, John said. Mance's mouth went thoughtful. Where your God looks and ours looks too, he said at last. Whitetree would do. The heart there is old enough to stand between arguments. Old things have no stake in our quarrels. They remember all wrongs at once, and that makes them quiet. He glanced up. A fortnight, if the weather is kind and no one is too bloody-minded. If not, a moon. Bring your dragon glass. Bring a horn. Bring a fire in your pocket. I have all three, John said. Good, Mance replied. We'll see whether you have a fourth. A tongue that can say two truths at once and not bite itself. He stood. The shadows behind him moved in concert, and in that movement John saw the shape of the thing he was trying to do. It was not a bridge. It was a thread thrown into wind and asked to catch itself to rock. Tell Tormund I came, Mance said. Tell him I laughed. He likes that. Tell him I did not promise him anything he can cut and weigh. Tell him to keep his sons close and his ale closer. Come yourself, John said. Mance flashed his eyes. I am here, he said softly, and John could not disagree. At the moot, little crow. I was a brother once. Do you know why I left? You wanted a different song, John said. Mance looked surprised and then amused. Once, he said, a lord's lady gave me a cloak sewn with red silk. She said it would set off my eyes. I wore it and sang, and the Lord was kind to me because when he looked at me he saw himself being kind. Then I came north again. My cloak tore. I mended it with what I had. That is the difference between you and me. Your cloak was given. Mine is made. He smiled without much humor. At the moot, boy. When he left, the snow swallowed him without bothering to show the trick of it. Ghost stood and sniffed the space Mance had left behind, then sneezed, as if the smell had tickled. Only when John's breath had smoothed again did he realize his fingers hurt where the bowstring had bitten them. He flexed his hand until the ache grew bearable. Behind him, one of the scouts spoke for the first time that hour. You said every, he murmured. Every means, even the ones who eat. Every, John said. The man said nothing. The wind made the sounds of men who wanted to argue and could not find words in time. They waited 2 days at Whitetree. Men came out of trees and under snow, under skies that did not change their face. Some brought nothing. Some brought bundles bound in old skin. One brought an old woman with a tattooed face whose eyes were cataracts that reflected the fire like milk. She put a hand on the weirwood and laughed so quietly only Ghost's ears pricked. John gave her stew and a corner by the fire, and in return she taught him a word in the old tongue he did not know, Ayok, which meant a promise made when you cannot keep your face from breaking. He did not know why he would need that word, but his mouth was the kind that remembered. When the appointed day came, they went to Whitetree again, not as guests but as men with a claim to make. The clearing was ringed by men and things that were not precisely men. Giants stood back of the men as if trying to pretend they were only very large trees. They breathed in white curtains. Mammoths steamed. A noise like a mill started up and down the line as spear shafts banged on shields and men tested the weight of their opinions. The weirwood watched with its blind red eyes. Mance stood where a man might stand if he did not wish to be taller than another man. Tormund stood near him with his hands on his hips and his beard blowing. Styr was a lean blade of a man with a face like a chipped bronze plate and the sort of stillness that made you nervous. The weeper was red to the ears, as if he had been crying in the cold and the tears had frozen there. His grin was too long and too practiced. Rattleshirt rattled. He leaned against his clacking and looked bored. A spear wife with hair as white as ghosts regarded Jon with interest from a little behind Mance, her eyes dark and decided. Mance lifted his hand, palm out, and the noise dwindled by grudging degrees. This is the hand that took salt to the mouth of a lord once and learned how salt tastes in those houses, he said. This is the hand that mended a cloak when it tore. This is the hand that will not feed you lies like meat if there is no meat. Listen, he did not start with Jon. He was not a fool. He spoke of the winter and the fact that you could smell it under everything now, the way you smell smoke when it has sunk into your hair. He spoke of fish frozen under clear lids of ice and how men did not starve so long as they could learn to hold their breath and break a hole with knuckles and not cry when they bled. He spoke of children and of the way a woman's hair smells different when there is no soap for it. He spoke of indignities with respect and made laughter not feel like cruelty. He spoke of the dead only at last, and he did not make them beautiful. The dead, Mance said, were lazy. They did not work for their meat. They waited for it to stop moving. The dead were cowards. They went wherever the least resistance lay. The dead had no honor. They did not keep guessed right. He painted them with contempt, not terror, and men liked him for that. Then he turned and showed the hand again with his palm toward Jon like a man introducing a thing he had made that had turned out not badly. This is Jon Snow, he said. He wants to build a bridge out of a wall. That makes him an idiot and brave and perhaps also right. We will hear him. The silence that followed had 1,000 knives in it. Jon walked into it, feeling those knives turn to watch him go by. He did not bow. He did not shout. He did not spread his arms. He spoke as he had in the common hall, with the careful slowness of a man laying a plank he means others to walk on. He told of the fist and of his brothers and of blue eyes. He spoke of dragonglass and of fire and of the lessons the dead had taught him, that courage without knowledge is pride, and pride is warm only to the man who is busy dying of it. He said the word neighbor again and felt it in his mouth like a stone that a man spends a month smoothing in his pocket until it's a talisman. He said the word gift as if it meant something besides land on a map. He tried to stand where their words could meet without pushing each other down. He did not say please. He did not promise more than he owned. He only promised that the gate would open if they came without raiding, and that axes would be traded for bread and bread for work, and that dragonglass would be set into wood and also into hearts, one lesson at a time. When he finished, the weeper laughed without humor and then did it again with humor. Sweet words, he said. I have heard sweet words before. They go down easy and come up sour. You want us to lay down our knives. You want us to be cut without cutting back. You want us to come to your gate like cattle, let you count us, let you number our sons. We have a name for men who count us. We have a name for men who take tithes. We have a name for men who tell us where to sleep and how to lie with our wives. That name is enemy. No one will count you who does not also count himself, Jon said. Work for bread, bread for work. No lord, no crown. Then whose numbers matter? Styr asked, and his voice was a bronze thing too. The dead's, Jon said, and some men laughed and some did not. The spearwife with white hair stepped forward a pace. What of guessed right? She asked calmly. A man takes bread and salt in my tent and then touches what I have promised to another. I cut him. Your ways say I must not. Your ways are a chain. Our ways say you do what you will and then take the price, Jon said. Guest right is bread and salt. A man who breaks it is a guest no longer but a thief. He gets a thief's justice. You can hang him with my rope. But you must not cut a man because your cousin stumbled looking at him. We will teach the men south how not to stare. that made laughter that knew what it was laughing at. He had guessed, and he had guessed in the right direction. The laugh turned hands that had been gripping spear hafts into hands around their own bellies. Rattleshirt rattled pointedly. "Why should we trust a crow?" he demanded. "A crow's tongue says what the Lord Commander tells it to say. When the Lord Commander freezes, the tongue will say a new thing. And crows fly south when the wind's wrong. They do not stay to watch the feast they have called. Because the gates will open," John said. "The first sign will be the horns. 3 long and 1 short, and the doors open. If they do not, you can put my head on a spear and rattle it yourself." He looked at Mance then and at Tormund. "I've spoken. Will you ask them to speak?" Mance lifted a finger, and the murmur that had begun tried to continue despite itself and lost. He looked at Styr first. "Magnar." Styr's lip moved in a humorless smile. "In the valley," he said. "We measure men by whether they hold their faces as still as stone when the wind bites them. This man does not twitch. He wears his ice well. He promises a thing that sounds like death and life at the same time. I like neither promise, but I like his courage. Courage puts lines in a man's face in the right places." He lifted his chin to John. "If your gate opens, I will come with my men. If it does not, I will come with my men." "Both ways," the Weeper said, delighted. "A man who makes certainty out of both ends of the stick is a man I want to drink with. I will come. I will bring men who like to eat their enemies and men who do not care what they eat so long as it is hot. I will bring fire. I will bring my jokes. Perhaps we will set them all down and pick up spears instead. Perhaps not." Tormund grunted. "I will come because I said I would," he said. "And because I want to see if your gate looks smaller when many men go through it or bigger." "Mother Mole will come," the white-haired spearwife said. "Not because this crow promised something, promises break like thin ice, but because she says the ice will break whether we are on it or not, and she would rather choose when to jump. And she says she dreamt of a long horn and thug. I do not like women who dream things beyond the next cookfire. I listen when their hands do not shake as they tell it." Mance looked at John, and the leader's quiet passed over the clearing. "It is decided," he said. "We will send runners. We will gather at the Bridge of Skulls and then at your gate. If you blow your horn, we will come like geese. If you do not blow, we will come like wolves." John nodded. His throat felt tight as if the air itself had grown so clean it cut. "We'll light beacons on the ridges when the gate opens," he said, "and we'll post men with flags by day. 3 blacks and a white for open. 3 blacks and a red for war. 3 blacks and a green if the river is no longer safe to cross. Learn them." "And how will we see flags at night, little crow?" Rattleshirt asked, amused. "We will go to sleep and trust your rope to pull us through the dark?" "We'll set lamps," John said evenly, "and carry embers in covered braziers. And teach boys to listen for the tone of the horns, because there are men who cannot hear their own wives but can hear a note in fog." That oddly quieted men. They liked the image of boys with lamps. Men are always in love with the future when it looks small enough to hold. The moot ended the way a winter storm ends. Uneasily, and with no clear line between ending and not ending. Men drifted away in knots, talking low, eyes cutting. The giants went in their slow way, making a sound like big ships. A woman ground grain in a stone bowl as if the world had not shifted a finger's breadth. Mance vanished when no one watched him do it. The Weeper told a joke about a crow and a goat that was unfunny and made everyone laugh because the alternative was thinking too hard, and no one wanted to think so hard their faces cracked. John stood under the weirwood until the red leaves looked almost warm. The trick of winter is that it teaches you to see heat where there is none. Ghost pressed his flank against John's knee. The tree watched them. It had watched men make kings out of bones and bones out of kings and had not done anything about either. John understood it better than he had a year ago and hated that. "You've gone and promised things," a voice said at his shoulder. It was the white-haired spearwife. Up close, John could see pale scars along her jaw as neat as stitching. "Do you know how to keep them?" "No," John said. He looked her in the eye, and she tilted her head. But I know how to say when I cannot and give my body where my words fail. Honest, she said, as if tasting a foreign fruit that might be poisoned but was certainly interesting. I am Val. I know, John said. Do you? Her smile was small and dangerous. Then you think you know many things. I know this, he answered. If you go to Hardhome, do not go last. Her smile thinned to nothing. You have read letters, she said. Letters do not smell rot. They do not hear the ice break. They do not see the way crows fly low when there is meat coming. I've smelled rot, John said softly, and heard ice break, and watched crows look like the truth for the first time in their lives. She studied him, and then she nodded once. If you blow your horn, we will come, she said. If you do not, we will come. But if your men cut us as we come, I will put a knife in you and call it justice. It will feel like not enough. It would be more than I deserve, John said. Good, Val said. Then she was gone in a trick of light. Ghost licked the space she had occupied, as if women left tastes that men did not notice. They began to prepare. The days took on the clean hunger of work. Men cut wood until their hands blistered and then cut with blisters until their hands grew a hide. Sam read until ink marked his face in an archipelago of black freckles, and he began to dream of the old maps and wake with the taste of old glue. The smith swore and set heads in wood and swore and set more. Boys learned the horns, and the horns learned the boys, and messages ran up and down the wall as if the whole length of it were a throat and it had learned to sing. The first runners returned with stories, and with people shadowing them in the trees, not close enough to count and not far enough to forget. The second runners returned with an arrow in one leg and an arrow in one arm and no arrows in their backs. Even the Ice River folk were listening. The third runners did not return at all, and the fourth returned with riddles. This is what happens when you call men. They come in pieces. 2 nights before the day John had named, a thing came out of the dark and stood on the ice 100 paces from the gate and watched the wall like a man looks at a woman he has not decided whether to kill or to marry. It wore flesh like a mask of blue glass, and its hair blew in a wind that had not touched John's face. It did not move. It watched, and then it raised one hand very slowly, as if reminding them that it had hands too, and then it lowered that hand again the way a priest lowers a cup. Ghost made no sound. John felt his breath turn to coins that the air stole from his mouth. He did not order arrows. He did not light a firebrand and throw it at the thing's feet. He stood. The watcher stood. They measured each other with the carefulness of 2 men who have already met and will meet again in a place that has not been built. After a time, the thing turned and went into the forest with the soft, absolute finality of an answer a man hoped not to hear. The snow he had stood on did not melt and did not remember his weight. John did not sleep. He went up to the top of the wall and leaned on the merlins and let the wind use all of its small hands on him and did not move. He thought of the word neighbor until it lost its shape and became something else. He tried to imagine the sound of 3 long blasts and 1 short going out across the white and coming back to him inside human lungs. He did not speak. There are words men say to be brave and words men say to be less alone. Neither of those kinds were useful to the ice or the wind or the dead thing that had looked at him with interest. At dawn the ravens rose from the rookery like ash from a cold fire. At mid-morning men climbed the ridges with bundles under their arms and set the beacons. At noon, far off, a thin line of men appeared along the edge of the world. The line became a snake, and then the snake became a river, and then the river became men again, small and moving and not all at the same pace. They did not sing. They did not shout. They came like people who had learned the price of sound. John held the horn. It was old wood bound in iron bands that had rusted and been replaced and rusted again. It did not look like a thing that could move the world. Neither did he. Blow it, Dywin said at his elbow, grinning into the wind like a man who had fallen in love with frostbite. John set the horn to his mouth. He drew breath in until his chest hurt the way a broken rib hurts, both pain and memory of pain in the same instant. He blew. The sound went into the air and came back from the ice and went out again and found the ridges and the trees and the men on the ridges and the birds in their winter nests. It hit the dead spaces where no bird roost and made those places tremble. It went out to the place where the watcher had stood, and it went beyond that to the lake where once a village had been, and to the stone where some man had cut a name into lichen and called that immortality. And it said one thing in a voice that was too big to be contained in any mouth. Open. Gates moved. Chains answered the horn with their own music, clanking and muttering and, at last, sighing as if relieved to be allowed to do what they had been made for. Men on the gatehouse lifted the flags Sam had made like a woman lifts a newborn. Carefully, and with a terrible tenderness that hopes the thing is not as breakable as it looks. Black, black, black and white. Far off, in the line of men, a sound went up as if someone had taken a tight fist out of a chest. The line broke into clumps, and those clumps into families, and those families into hands, and those hands began to move faster, and then they slowed, because men are wary when something they have been told will not happen begins to happen. John lowered the horn. His mouth tasted of iron and of old wood that had been licked by many men. Ghost licked his hand, and his tongue was warm enough to hurt. Tormund came first, because of course he did. He came at a steady stride and did not look back, because a man like that knows if the world is following him by the weight on his shoulders and does not need to check. Mance came who knows when, because a man like that can arrive without arriving. Steer came with his men in a block that looked like a piece of the Bronze Age walking. The Weeper came with men who looked like laughter had cut them, and they had not minded. Giants came in their slow way, and a mammoth sneezed and coated a dozen men in something that would be warm and then not. At the gate, John raised his hand. The world paused. He spoke, and his voice went no farther than it needed to. Men do not like to be shouted at when it matters. Come under the wall, he said, which was a strange blessing and a stranger command. Come south. Work for bread. Bread for work. Guest right kept.
No ride.
Dragonglass for the hands that hold to this. Men came. They came with fear like a second skin and with hope like a third. They came with knives hidden everywhere knives can be hidden, and with children in their arms and with old women's hands on their belts. They came with stories and with silences. They came with the dead in their eyes and with the living on their backs. The first of them passed under the ice and stopped and looked up as if to see if the sky still existed on the other side. It did. It was as gray as the other sky. The difference was not in the color. Inside the yard, black brothers stood with hands on hilts and eyes above scarves. They watched men become neighbors one by one. Some of them had to unclench their jaws with their hands. Some of them found their fingers had closed on air where a spear had once been. The air was full of breath and of the smell of many kinds of lives. John watched it all like a man watches a river. He has stepped into that is colder than he had believed. He did not shiver. He could not afford to look like a man who would. Mormont stood on the steps beneath the Lord Commander's tower like a statue of himself carved in pine and dipped in soot. His face did not move, but when the first child laughed at the sight of Ghost and touched the wolf's ear with a mittened hand and did not lose the hand for it, the old bear's eyes did a small, peculiar thing, as if a crack had opened in a rock and let out a scent of spring water that had been held in stone for a long time. In the east, the light was failing already. It does that quickly in winter, goes from day to night without visiting evening. Men kept coming. The beacons burned. The horn lay quiet. Ghost lay at John's boot and blinked and watched 1,000 shapes move, each one of them a separate heat. The air had a taste like iron and something sweeter John could not yet name. He did not look west. He did not look east. He looked at the gate, and at the people coming through it, and at the place where the ice along the edge of the world had held a watcher who was not a man and was very interested in what men did. He did not count. That would come later. He did not make lists or point. He let the river flow, and he stood in it, and he tried to be stone without forgetting that stone drowns, too. The first fight came before twilight, and it was not the kind anyone had prepared for. An old man in sealskins from the frozen shore and a boy from Molestown met in an alley between the armory and the stables, and both reached for the same bucket of water. The old man's hand was faster. The boy's temper was younger. The bucket spilled. Ghost's head came up. John crossed the yard in a dozen strides and stood between them with his hands open. "The water is the walls," he said. The boy blinked, caught by surprise at the form the law had taken. The old man looked at John as if measuring whether that sentence had meat in it. "The wall has no throat," he said at last. How will it drink? It drinks what we give it and keeps it, John said. It is not a throat. It is a heart. No one drinks until the bucket is filled again. The boy scowled. The old man grunted. They filled the bucket together with snow from a drift and carried it to the trough, and each took one handful, and each lost none of his dignity because John had not demanded it. They went their ways with the taste of clean cold on their tongues, which can be a kind of truce when you have no other. Later, in the common hall, the heat of many bodies made the cold into something you could almost forget. Fires burned in every hearth. The stew pot breathed. Children slept crammed together like puppies. Men who had sworn never to sit among crows sat at the edge of benches and pretended they were standing. The walls sweated a little where the heat had found stone. It smelled of onions and wet wool and smoke and of the inside of old leather, and it was, in that moment, the smell of an idea made into a room. Tormund drank from a horn and gave half to a giant who took it in fingers as big as branches. "We will need more pits," he said in a voice that tried not to be worried and failed. "And more wood, and someone to teach your boys not to look at spearwives like they've never seen teeth, and someone to teach spearwives not to stab them for it." "We will need everything," John said. "Aye," Tormund replied. "Everything is a word bigger than every." They sat a while without speaking. Noise ebbed and flowed. In the corner, Sam read to a cluster of children from a book with a broken spine. He read in a voice that knew how to be careful with other people's stories. They did not understand half of what he said, but they slept better with it in the air. Val came and stood behind them, her hands on the back of the bench like a woman deciding whether wood would hold. "Your horn," she said. "I heard it in my bones." "Good," John replied. "The dead will have heard it too," she said without adornment. "Yes," John said. She nodded, pleased in a way that did not look like joy. "Then we are ready to begin," she said, and the word begin slid into the fire like a log that had been too large to catch before and now at last did. Night put its hand over Castle Black and the stars came out, very bright and very cold. The wall held them up as if a man had stacked jewels on a narrow shelf just to see whether he could. The gates were shut, and the chains sighed like old men lying down. Far away, somewhere men did not want to think about yet, ice cracked in the dark as if something with a patience older than forests had shifted. Inside the common hall, a child stirred, and a giant muttered in his sleep, and Sam turned a page he had already read twice, and the stew pot made the sound of a small stream. John did not sleep. He walked the yard and the wall, and between the pallets where men he did not know breathed and twitched. He walked until the walking became thinking and the thinking became a shape he could not hold all of, and he did not try to. He walked until footsteps beside his were his own and Ghost's and another man's, and when he looked it was Mance, and Mance said nothing, and John said nothing, and they walked under the same stars. In the morning, men would cut wood, and other men would cut argument into pieces that could be carried, and someone would steal something and get caught and be made to give it back without losing his face. In the afternoon, horns would sound for something small and men would practice hearing them so that when the large thing came their ears would not betray them. In the evening, a giant would pick up a child by the scruff and set him back by his mother because he had wandered after Ghost and the wolf had vanished and the child had not. In the night, a watcher would stand again at the edge of the trees and consider human work with his clean blue consideration. The river had been invited into the yard. It was too late to send it away politely and too early to know whether it would leave you something in the eaves for summer. John's breath smoked the air. He lifted his hand and held it there until it stopped shaking, and when it did he could feel the shape of the cold without resenting it, the way a man feels his father's hand heavy on his shoulder and knows it means two things at once. Stay, go. He lowered his hand. He looked at the gate. He listened to the wind talk to the ice in its old language of pressure and patience. He thought of Hardhome, and of a shore where fires would burn too bright because that is what men do when they are guessing at the dark. Snow began again, very lightly, the flakes so fine they were only an idea of snow. They landed on his lashes and did not melt and perched there like tiny birds. "Begin," he said, to no one who needed the word and to everyone who would not know it had been said, and the day did. Snow fell until the world forgot it had edges. Men woke under it and brushed it out of their beards. Children ate it when they were not supposed to. Fires hissed as it tried to teach them another lesson. The morning stretched itself thin and crackling over Castle Black. Breath plumed, ropes sang, axes waited to be lifted. Someone coughed and swore. Someone else answered with a joke about a goat and a crow and the way both of them managed to smell of damp hay no matter where they slept. John watched the yard become intent. He sent men to the haunted forest with sledges and the promise that they would not go farther than they could return by dusk. He sent others to the burned shells of the nearest villages in the gift to see what could be salvaged. Shutters, pots, stones not too proud to be walls again. He set boys to the horn drills, the big ones teaching the small and the small teaching the big by making them laugh and therefore listen. He put Sam in the rookery and the library by turns, and Sam emerged with bits of knowledge clinging to him like burrs. How to lash a dragonglass knife into a carved bone grip. How many men a beacon team truly needed if they were not to sleep through their own shifts. How to salt fish when there is not enough salt. By mid-morning, giants came into the yard with their long stride, each step a whole decision, and stood as still as pillars while Tormund talked to them with his hands and his beard and his whole chest. They listened with the patience of old trees and then moved toward the forest. The mammoths followed, snorting steam, the hair along their spines iced into little white quills. They bent their heads and took dead pines in their trunks and pulled until the roots came groaning out of the earth like old men out of bed. The sound traveled a long way, a deep tearing that made the wall answer softly in its guts. Steer stood with his thens and made lists aloud, which was funny only because he did it in the voice of a man announcing a killing. Huts, 40 for the first week. Pits, 8 for refuse, 4 for meat, 3 for ashes. Lashes, none, he added, with a look that said he would not mind. But he had heard the word neighbor and was trying to see if it would fit in his mouth. Dragonglass spearheads, 700 by moon's end. Oaths, daily. Oaths? The weeper asked, cheerful as a cat. Will you want us to say pretty words with our pretty mouths? I will want you to wake and say you shall not steal from men you have slept beside. Street, Yer said without smiling. And then I will want to watch you not do it. Words first, then work. Then we will see whether the oaths keep more men honest than the fear of the axe did. Look at the bronze man, the weeper said, grinning as if he meant to bite the air and see whether it bled. He is already making priests. I will make a joke about this tonight and laugh until my ribs crack. Laugh now, Steer said. There will be no meat tonight unless you cut wood. The weeper laughed anyway and went to find an axe. Men are always making each other into the thing they swear they do not need. By noon, the first sledges returned. Men loosed their harnesses and stiffened their fingers around bowls as they ate. Women took tools into their hands with a competence that made some black brothers look away, ashamed that they had not guessed it. Ghost roamed and returned and roamed again, checking lines of scent as if they were verses in a song he liked and wanted to get right. Twice he stopped and lifted his head and knit the air with his nostrils without making a sound. The second time, John felt a cold not made of weather pass along his spine and settle between his shoulder blades like a coin a faithless friend has slipped there as a joke. He went to the top of the wall and looked north. The light had gone to that gray that is the color of a question. Somewhere out there, something watched and counted. It would not need horns. It would not need maps. It would wait until men forgot their own cleverness, and then it would take them. John stood until the cold had worked its way into the bottoms of his teeth and made them ache to be warm. He went down again and set more men to the drills. In the afternoon, a quarrel broke like rotten ice. A then boy came at a Molestown butcher with a bone pick, quick as a stoat, and the butcher's cleaver rose and fell twice before John could reach them. The then boy bled like a man's mouth after winter and smiled through it, which was worse. John knocked the cleaver from the butcher's hand with his forearm and hurt himself and did not mind it. He knelt and bound the boy's arm with a strip of linen torn from a shirt, then sent the butcher to fetch water and stand beside the boy while he drank it. There were words that wanted to be said and men to say them, but John cut those words short. Work buys bread, he said. Blood buys nothing. If you've eaten in this yard, you give your morning to cutting wood for others, and your evening to carrying it. The boy will do the same when his hand closes. If you have a quarrel, bring it to the oak table in the common hall and leave your knives elsewhere. If you cut each other in alleys, I will cut you off from the pot and the fire. That will kill us slower, the butcher muttered, eyes on his own boots. How is that better? It is not better, John said. It is merely mine to give. They brought their quarrel to the oak table at dusk. The boy's mother came, white hair braided back with sealskin cord, and looked at John like a woman who had seen a man promise sheaves in drought and then somehow make a harvest appear. The butcher's wife came too, one hand on a child's shoulder that had not the sense to be afraid. The room held its breath. John listened, which is a thing men call weakness when they wish not to do it themselves. He gave the boy the duty of carrying dung to the ash pits with a then man who had the same scar on his mouth and would teach him not to make the same expression. He set the butcher to the fish sheds at Eastwatch for a fortnight, where the smell would teach him patience or else drown him. When it was done, the weeper clapped and laughed and said very loud, "This crow is making a village," and the word village fluttered around like a moth that could not decide whether to burn or to sleep. At night, Mance's shadow appeared against the far hearth, sat, and became the man. He held something that looked like a flute carved from bone and did not play it. "You are learning the other song," he said without invitation. "The one that keeps men from sticking each other in their cups." "It is uglier," John said, "but it has a steady beat." "Ugliness is honesty when the light is wrong," Mance replied. "Kings spend half their lives trying to make ugliness look like a banner."
I prafe a campot.
He twirled the bone flute in his fingers once. "We will need boats." "Cotter Pike has boats," John said. "He has opinions too." "Opinions are like fish," Mance said. "You cannot make men eat them without salt." "Sam says the currents bite like wolves near the Cape," John answered. "Maester Kennett wrote it. He says drift ice moves faster than a bad mood. And a man who mistakes the pressure lines for open water ends up in a story no one wants to hear at supper." Mance's mouth smiled. Kennett was a clever little crow. He would have made a decent thief. "Send for Pike. I will send Mother Mole's people along the shore with fires in the dunes. They dream badly but walk well." "Send them with rope," John said, "and with the word for help, in a way men do not think means pity." Mance nodded as if that had been a song he had heard before. "Do you sleep?" "No," John said. "Good," Mance replied, and did not mean it entirely. The next day was ice and wind with a rim of light so thin it looked like something a blade had shaved off the sun. John rode for Eastwatch with Six and Ghost, and the road tried to become a river and wash them off it. The trees clenched and unclenched and flicked their snow down in small, spiteful avalanches. Men spoke little. When they did, they said useful things like hole and ice and listen. Twice they passed something under the snow that moved the way snow does not. Ghost stopped once and huffed and made no sound and then moved on. John did not ask him to explain. Eastwatch smelled of salt and a kind of rot that knows too much to be ashamed of itself. Masts swayed under frost. Men in tarred leather turned their heads all at once like gulls when something edible hits a wave. Cotter Pike came down the quay like a short storm. He had a face like a knuckle and an expression like a man who has found a good fishhook in a bad fish. "You're late," he said. "I did not promise a time," John replied. "Then you're not late," Pike said. "But I am." He jerked his chin toward the sea. "The ice says it's spring and the wind says it isn't. If I go when the ice tells me to, I come back with splinters and a story. If I go when the wind tells me to, I don't come back and someone else tells the story. You've brought me words about boats and fires and dreamers on the shore. I've brought you a deckhand with ears that hear things men don't." A boy stepped from behind him, wide-shouldered and salt-stained as an old rope. He had the listening look, the sort of seriousness young faces sometimes wear when they have not yet been told that some kinds of attention are unfashionable. "Name's Toller," Pike said. "He hears the grind under the hull before the men do. He hears the pressure lines sing. He'll show you where the water moves like a beast with a bad temper. Toller nodded, eyes on Ghost as if the wolf were the sea. Ghost sniffed his boots and sneezed, and Toller did not flinch. You can lash your dragonglass into nets, Toller said without preamble. Tie it so it hangs like teeth. When the dead come in the water, their skin remembers nothing. Sharp is still sharp. They float stupid. You stab down and pull up and try not to think about names. John looked at Pike, who shrugged. Boy taught me it, he said. I don't pretend I like that. I needed teaching. We took a boat out in the melt last year and found a thing that looked like a man whose mother didn't love him. We came back with 2 men and a story, which is fewer men than I prefer and more story than I like. He spat, and the spit froze and made a small jewel on the planks. You've got wildlings in your yard. I do, John said. You've got the right kind of madness, Pike said. I'll lend you 4 cogs and 5 boats that hate me and love the ice. I'll take men who know how to pull and men who know how not to scream when something takes a finger. I'll take your bone flute if it plays anything but songs. I'll take your mother mole if she keeps to her muttering and not my wheel. He scratched at his jaw, peeling ice out of the hair there. You'll take my temper. I don't have a spare. I'll take it, John said, and give you Tormund's jokes in exchange. Keep them, Pike said. I get enough nonsense from the gulls. He glanced at the horizon where the ice made a ragged lip. You've heard it then, the hum. He made a face at his own word, as if it were too soft for the thing it tried to describe. At night, when the world's cold enough to crack but doesn't. It's old ice singing, men say. I say it's teeth. We heard a watcher, John said. He had blue in his eyes a painter would envy. Pike looked at him in the way men look when they have put their hand on a hot kettle once and do not intend to do it again. Then if the hum is teeth, those eyes are the throat, he said. Don't fall in. They went out on the 3rd day, when the wind and the ice had told a single story for a few hours. The sea took the boats like a man takes a risk, with a sucked breath and a slight narrowing of the eyes. Toller stood at the bow with one hand on the strake and listened. He said port and starboard when a grown man might have said left and right. And the men did as he said because when boys listen like that, you either trust them or throw them overboard, and this boat was not famine yet. Ghost crouched in the prow as if he had always been a thing that rode a keel. He looked wrong there and perfectly right, both at once. John had a rope around his own waist and around a mast, which was the same as telling the sea he respected it but did not intend to let it decide all the pronunciations. They saw the first signs of Hardhome by the birds. Gulls, yes, but also ravens and small brown things that looked like fists with wings. They came off the land and spoke to the boats in the rude language of hunger. Then they saw the smoke that did not belong to a cook fire and did not belong to a forest. It was a frustrated smoke, the kind a man makes when he does not know where to put the wood and puts it everywhere. On the shore, people moved like spilled grain. Some ran to the water and then away from it when the water moved. Some stood and did nothing because they had forgotten what doing felt like and how it started. A woman on a dune raised both hands and then let them fall and then raised them again like a person learning a new word. Mother Mole, John thought, and maybe it was not, and it would not matter to the sea. They beached the first boats in a grind that set men's teeth vibrating in their mouths. Toller shouted, and the men with him shouted, and the shouting found a rhythm that made sense. Ropes went out. Shoulders took weight. Men moved in lines, and when lines move they become more than the men in them. They carried women and children and old men with hands like dried kelp. They carried bundles that were the whole of a life and dropped them when a child cried and did not even curse. They loaded the boats wrong and then right. They loaded them more slowly than they should have because fear makes men careful in the wrong ways. The dead came out of the tree line quietly. They always did, in John's experience. They did not roar until they had you, and then it was not a roar but a kind of close humming that men's throats made when air moved through them without their permission. The first of them stepped onto the wet beach and did not sink because they were light. Death makes you lighter in certain places. The second had no nose and no reason to have one. The third was a little girl with hair stuck to her face like seaweed. Men who had been throwing rope began to throw their lunches back out of their bodies without intending to, which made the sand darker in patches and attracted nothing, not even flies. It was too cold for flies. "Dragonglass nets," Toller said, and the men with him unfurled them with hands that shook because it was cold and because it was now. The first cast bit. The teeth of black stone tore the first row of the dead into motion that did not look like motion belongs on a beach. They fell and tried to rise and fell again because ankles matter to even the worst things. Men stabbed down, pulled up, stabbed down again, learning as they went the way your hands learn a tool. The second cast hit wrong and tangled two men in it, and if Pike had not cut them free with 3 savage cuts, he would have had fewer men and more story. "Again," he said, and the word had a shape like a hammer in the air. The boats took on more lives. The water mocked them with its precision. A man in the second boat fell backward into the sea without noise and came up without eyes. Ghost leaped as if the boat were shore and the water were air and took the thing's throat and shook it until the dragonglass shards there made hushing sounds. And then Ghost was back on the beam with one paw bleeding and no interest in that. John's rope went tight. He felt his waist bite and welcomed it. Being held is one kind of salvation. On the dune, the woman raised both hands again. She opened her mouth. No sound came out that John could hear, but men around her heard something and turned and moved as if they had always wanted to. Mother Mole, he thought. Yes, this time he was sure in the way a man is sure when the word for the thing finally sits right on his tongue. She pointed not at the boats but at the line of old fire pits along the shore. Men ran to them with torches that must have been saved at cost, and the pits took fire in a stuttering way, like old men learning to dance again. The fire moved along the sand in a line of angry stars. The dead paused because even laziness knows when a thing is hot enough to deserve respect. "Back!" John shouted. Back and again. He did not know whether he meant the men or the tide or himself. He dragged a boy out of the surf by his armpits and handed him to a giant hand that had appeared where a giant hand would be useful. He saw Pike swing his or like an axe and heard the sound it made against something that did not need a skull to stand. He saw Toller's face, listening amid the clangor, and trusted it. They went out and came in, went out and came in. The line of fire burned down to coals and then slept and then woke farther along where Mother Mole's people had hidden more dry things. A woman put her baby into John's arms without looking to see if he was a man or a wolf, and then reached for another child by pure arithmetic. The baby was small and warm and so alive it hurt. John handed it to Mance without thinking, and Mance's eyes widened as if he had just been given a particularly delicate instrument. He cradled the child in his patched cloak as if it were a song that needed quiet. When it was done, it was not done, because that is how these things are. There were people on the shore still, and there were dead things in the trees still, and men's arms shook from the work of pulling and stabbing. They went out again because the sea had not told them to stop yet. They loaded more lives into a boat than it liked and promised it they would not do so again. Then at last the wind changed its story and the ice agreed, and Pike spit another jewel and said a word that meant nothing at all by itself, "Enough," and the men believed it. They came back with the boats heavy in the way boats like to be heavy. The children cried and then slept and then cried again. Men bled. A woman with hair the color of wheat in summer, which no one had seen in a long time, sat down on the quay and put her face in her hands and did not move for a time that felt like part of a prayer. Mother Mole came last, walking like a woman who counts the earth under her with her feet and gives thanks for the number. And when she reached the end of the planks, she looked at John and smiled with no teeth at all. "You blew the horn," she said. Her voice was a crack in ice. "I did," John answered. "You will blow it again," she said, "before you are old." "I know," John said. He did not know. He only understood. That night in Eastwatch's long hall, the sea boomed under the pilings and made the cups buzz. Men ate and could not taste, and then tasted something and did not know whether it was food or relief. Pike sat with his elbows on his knees and let the heat thaw him like a man who has decided to live another day. He nodded to John once in a way that put something like respect in the air and then claimed it had not. "Boy hears better than you," he said, jerking his thumb at Toller, who had fallen asleep sitting up and did not look younger for it, only the same. "He does," John said. "Good," Pike replied, and that was his blessing. By the time John rode back to Castle Black, The beacons along the ridges had become a language. Men could tell by the weight of the light what the horn meant before it sounded. They took to the signs the way cold takes to bone. The yard, which had been a yard, was becoming a square. The smith had stopped swearing in long skeins and now swore methodically, which meant progress. He showed John the spears with dragon-glass heads set into elm shafts bound with sinew. He ran his thumb along one and pulled it away bleeding and said, "Sharp," as if pleased to be reminded of it with his own blood. Sam had found a scroll so many times mended it had more repair than original. "This part," he said, tapping a patch. "It says the horn code in the time of the Long Watch was 3 long and 1 short for open, 3 long and 2 short for close, 3 long and 3 short for fire in the forest, and 2 long for ship in distress, and 1 long for come to the table. That last one is not serious, but it was used by a man named Sir Author of the name is rubbed, but anyway, he used it whenever he had something clever to say and wanted people to hear him." He paused, flushed. "That part is not important, but the rest." "It's important," John said, and Sam's ears went pink in a way that made him look like a boy on a winter morning when his mother wraps a scarf too tight. "We need bells," Sam said. "Horns sleep when men do somehow. Bells wake. But you must be careful with bells. The wrong tone will make men's hearts beat wrong." "Fetch me the right ones, then," John said. "If anyone can hear a right bell, it's you." Sam laughed in a small way that held back tears and did not let them spoil it. "Ayok," he said. And John remembered the old woman on the weirwood bench and the meaning of that word and put it in his pocket too. More people came through the gate in drifts and in lines. A man with his hand missing at the wrist and a smile that kept running away and then coming back. A girl with a scar at her throat who spoke of nothing and watched everything. A boy who had never seen a bottle and tried to drink from one the wrong way and then cried when he learned the right way, because there are some lessons that do not feel like triumph. John set them to work and to learning and to unlearning. He enforced guest right with a stubbornness that made even the weeper respect it. He named the market day with a word that finally tasted right. Sharefire. He said it under his breath first and then said it aloud and listened to how it landed. Sharefire. A promise where heat and goods are both measured and both lent. On the first Sharefire, a giant traded a copper kettle mended with tin for a blanket sewn from sealskin and old promises. A spearwife traded a spool of gut for a sack of wheat that had been freed from a ruined granary. A black brother traded gossip for a smile. The weeper stood and told a story about a man who married his own shadow and found it had secrets. And men laughed and then were quiet, because sometimes jokes are only a different way of measuring fear. Alistair Thorne returned on a day of thin sunlight that turned men's breath to silver. He rode into the yard as if nothing had happened while he was away and everything had happened without his permission. He looked at the giants and the spearwives and the children sleeping in rows along the wall, and his face did something that was not exactly disgust and not exactly triumph. Something like recognition that an enemy has built a house inside your mouth and you cannot spit it out without losing teeth. "You've brought the forest into the hall," he said to John, voice like a knife. "Was the yard not drafty enough?" "I brought men," John said. "Did you bring their knives too, or did they come with them?" Thorne asked, the corners of his mouth humorless. He glanced past John to Georg Mormont, who had taken a place under the Lord Commander's tower where he could see and be seen. "My lord, have you decided to be merciful to those who hunted your brothers, or merely to yourself, to save you the trouble of ordering hangings?" Mormont did not look at Thorne. He looked at John as if the boy were a mirror he had used a long time and trusted without liking. "What matters most," he said, "is that the men we need to kill the dead are alive when the dead arrive." He looked at Thorne then, the way a winter looks at a man who has worn a thin cloak on purpose. "Do not quarrel with the rope unless you want it to remember your name." Thorne's jaw tightened. He said. It was not agreement and not refusal. It was the shape you put your mouth into when you do not intend to let your words be used against you later." He turned his horse and rode away without looking at the giants again. Men who liked to be led by contempt followed him with their eyes and then remembered the children and let their eyes fall. Ghost watched Thorne until he was gone and then lay down with his chin on his paws and looked like a statue of himself carved in snow. There were more fights. 2 spearwives cut a black brother's cloak into ribbons after he boasted that he had never been cold a day in his life, which is a foolish boast to make to women who sleep in snow when they must. A then stole a skin of wine and then returned it before he drank because Steer looked at him as if he had stolen a piece of the mountain and then put it back wrong. A boy from the shore took a dragonglass knife he had not earned and pricked his thumb and bled like a story, and Val held his hand and explained that blood is a language and you must not speak it without need. The boy believed her because she said it as if it were about building something rather than stopping something. John made a rule that surprised men by not being harsh. If a man stole bread and there was bread, he must stand at the pot one day and ladle it to those who came hungry. If he stole meat, he must carry wood 2 days. If he stole iron, he must sit with the smith for 3 and watch, which is a punishment no man who has ever wanted to move can stand. If he stole a person, he would die. He did not have to say the last twice. He went north again, farther than he liked, to check the beacon lines. He took with him a black brother with shoulders like an ox and a woman from the caves who had once run messages between camps and could read tracks as if they were letters. They found the first beacon team asleep because they had learned the rhythm of their own work too fast. John took their rope and tied it around their ankles and then tied the rope to a bell so that the next time they drifted into sleep the bell would ring and shame would wake them. He did not scold. He made the bell a joke and then made the joke a rule. On the second ridge, they found the ashes of a fire scattered and the prints of something that had not cared whether ashes stayed tidy. The woman knelt and put her hand to the ground and closed her eyes. "It thought," she said after a long time, opening them. It did not want to show it, but it thought. It stood there and looked at the fire and put its foot into it and watched the foot burn and did not care and then cared, a little, the way a man cares when a bee stings him in a story. It will not put its foot into fire twice without more thinking. The third time it will use a stick. "We'll burn sticks too," John said, "and then the trees that gave them." "It does not like to learn this way," she said, as if pitying it. "Neither do men," John said. "But they do." When they returned, Sam had built a board of horn notations with pegs and strings that turned the yard into a song you could see. He was embarrassed by it until the weeper whistled low and said, "Look at the little man making a big toy," and then seemed to like it enough to leave it alone and stop mocking boys who practiced. Mance wanted a talk with John and with Mormont that night. He came with his cloak of pieces and a face like a man calling a tune in his head. He waited until the hall emptied of all but fur and quiet. "The weeper wants to go back north and kill the ones who did not come," he said without sitting. "He says it is a kindness. He says leaving them is worse. He says many things," Mormont observed. "He says this and he believes it," Mance replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "I do not know what I believe. I know we need some men left north of the wall who know how to set a trap and not get caught in it. I know we need some who will be lures whether they intend to be or not. I know we need not to become the dead in our minds before they make us so in our bodies." "Don't send him," John said. "You will tell me where to send him?" Mance's smile was brief and almost fond. "Crow boy turns lord. I remember when you did not know how to stand under your own sword." "Send him east," John said. "Have him run along the shore and bring in stragglers. Have him burn the boats we cannot use and leave the ones that will float. He likes to cut. Let him cut driftwood and promises and the thought in a man's head that he will be the exception. Do not let him go into the trees to hunt. That is not hunting. That is listening for your own name in a mouth that is not a mouth." Mance studied him as if measuring whether the boy's face had learned to be as still as stone when the wind bit it. "You are learning," he said. "It will not save you, but it does something else I cannot name." He glanced at Mormont. "And you? Will you write letters to men who will not answer? Will you send ravens to lords who will send back questions and grain in equal measure?" "I will send letters," Mormont said. "I will not write them as if I am asking permission. I will write them as if I am informing a storm which roofs it may lift. Some will send salt. Some will send knives. Some will send both in one sack, and I will have to put my hand in and sort them and lose a finger perhaps. I will do it." He leaned back and looked older and younger at once. "I do not like kings," he added, glancing at Mance. But I like a man who knows the cost of orders and pays it. Mance bowed in the style of no court at all. Then we will continue our ugly song, he said, and left before praise could stale. Winter 8 days the way a man eats bread when he does not yet trust that there will be more. You could feel it, the hunger of cold for what was warm. Men's cheeks went raw, women's hands cracked at the base of the thumb where skin is honest. Children's noses ran and froze and made them look like little beasts with pearls at their lips. The market, share fire, burned once a week and made a circle men could imagine as a town if they looked and kept looking. Steers' oaths in the mornings began to say themselves. Men woke with the words already forming like frost on the inside of their mouths. The smith's spears multiplied. The dragonglass baskets emptied and were refilled from caches in the snow and from the fist and from places old men remembered and had not told their sons, because men do not always pass on the thing that will save those sons. They pass on their pride and their grudges and their songs, and think that enough. One night the dead came into the yard because a man let them in without meaning to. He had gone out to piss against the lee of the stables because that was the warmest place to do it, and did not think to bring a friend with him. He had his cock in his hand and a thought about a stew of onions and venison that had never existed when the thing put its hands on his shoulders and whispered nothing into his ear. He turned and tried to put his body between the thing and the door and died wrong sideways with his mouth open like a cup. The dead thing walked into the stable, its feet leaving little ash marks where they had touched old straw. The horses did not scream because sometimes the world gives you the courtesy of not warning you too loudly, and you do not have to live every horror twice. It walked past a child sleeping in straw and did not look down. It walked toward the trough where the water had iced and broke the ice with its hand and stood and did not drink and made the water still. Then it turned very slowly, like a man remembering a word he has not used in a long time, and saw the child's hair glint. It began to move as if underwater, which is the speed of horror. Ghost came through the stall door like a knife. He hit the thing high and took it down. Men shouted. A bell rang without a hand to ring it, which is not a thing a bell should do. John took a spear from the wall and did not think and threw and heard the dragonglass bite. The thing thrashed. The water in the trough stilled and then moved again as if deciding to remember wind. The child woke and began to cry, a thin sound that would have broken stone if stone had a heart. Men came. They burned the thing with a breath held too long and exhaled into flame, a set of movements that had become a ritual, which is what you call a habit that saves you in the right order. In the morning, John took the bell down and looked at it. It was old brass, green in patches, and it smelled faintly of something like the inside of a church and something like old hands. He put it back up and patted it, absurdly, like a dog. "Thank you," he said. "Do bells have ears?" The weeper said from a fence rail where he had been watching nothing in particular. "They have what they need," John said. The days lengthened by things that were not light. A man who could not say the old tongue learned to say guessed right in it anyway, badly, and a woman who had never written her name made a mark with charcoal on a board and liked that the mark did not leave. A boy from Molestown taught a giant how to play at bones and then lost and loved that he had lost because some games are better when you can be beaten. Tormund created a contest where you held a burning brand and the winner was the one who did not drop it and did not pretend, and men burned their palms happily and then scowled at each other like old friends. Mother Mole came to share fire once and stood as still as a candle. She looked at the goods and the people and the way men's hands moved when they did not think anyone was watching, and she said nothing. Then she said to John, "The ice dreams. It dreams of men who dream on it. The dreamers stink. The ice does not like smells." She nodded as if satisfied by her own sentence and went away, and men who had been trying to overhear did not know what to do with it and left it for another day. Letters went south on ravens who were not enjoying the work and did it anyway. Some came back. Lady Meege Mormont sent a skin of bear fat that men rubbed on their hands and faces and then smelled like bear and laughed. She sent a note that said, "Feed them, fight beside them. If any of them touch my girls, I will send your head back in a jar." Lord Wyman Manderley sent flour and a note which weighed as much as flour, all politeness and weights and measures, and underneath the politeness something like greed, and under the greed, fear. The Umbers sent knives and no note at all. The Boltons sent nothing and a feeling men did not enjoy describing. The first winter baby born south of the wall to a free folk woman was born in the long hall where the stew pot breathed. The child came with a soft sound like a fist opening. Val held the midwife's pan, which was an honor of a sort she accepted without comment. The mother's hair was plastered to her forehead, and she cursed like a woman who believed in gods only when it hurt. When the child cried, the long hall went quiet the way the sea goes quiet in a story. The mother laughed through tears and said a word that meant a promise you make to yourself and keep even when everyone else tells you to eat and forget. It was not a word in the common tongue, but the meaning was the same in all tongues. She named the child Nogest, which made men look at each other and then nod, because that is a vow you can teach a child to bear. All the while the watcher came and went, sometimes at the treeline where snow made a dress for dead branches, sometimes on a ridge, sometimes out on the lake standing where the wind could have owned it and did not, sometimes in John's dreams, where it stood not looking at him yet knowing he was looking, and the knowledge itself made a kind of pressure behind his eyes. Ghost did not growl at it. He looked and then looked away, which is what you do when staring will not change a thing and will only feed it. On a day when the sky was the exact color of old steel, a man came running from the west with a horn in his hand that he blew wrong and right, and the sound tumbled over itself and made dogs bark and children put their hands over their ears and smile. He had run from a camp beyond the Bridge of Skulls where they had tried to make a village out of brush and hope. He had run to say that the ice had moved like a living thing and taken 3 tents and the old man in one of them who could not get his legs to remember which way to go. He had run to say that the sound the ice made was like singing and like knives and like nothing boys should hear this young. John sent a team with sledges and ropes and 2 giants who knew the river like other men know their wives' moods. He sent Val with them, which surprised men and then did not. She listened like a hunter and walked like a woman who did not believe in falling. He sent dragonglass and bells and one of Sam's boards tied to a boy's chest so that messages could be marked with pegs and sent back without words. He watched them go with the kind of fear you keep in your stomach because if you put it in your mouth it will ruin how you speak. He watched until they became smudges, and then until the smudges were a story, and then until the story was a set of facts he told himself in the night to make sleep feel like something earned. He went north again that week with Mance. They took a line of men who cut sign and a line of men who made signs for others to follow. The forest let them through grudgingly, like a host who has only 3 chairs and many guests. Birds watched them from branches and had opinions. They found a cave where someone had slept and left stones arranged like a prayer. They found a place where the snow had melted in a perfect circle around a stump that held a face carved into it. The face had no eyes and did not need them. They found bones and burned them and did not say the names attached to them because no one knew and making names up dishonors both. At midday, in a clearing, they met a band who had not come through the gate when the horn blew. They were thin and proud and not good at either. Their leader had a face like a fox who had learned too late to be careful. He spat at John's boots and then at Mance's for balance. "You make cattle," he said. "You drive them with fire and words." "I make neighbors," John said, "and fences where needed. You can be on either side. The dead do not ask which side you prefer." "We prefer the side with teeth," the man said. "So do I," John answered, and the truth of it made the man blink, as if he had been expecting a prayer. Mance did not speak until after there had been the kind of silence that measures what men are. "You will come," he said then, as if he were telling them that winter will arrive or that a man will die if he goes 3 days without water. "You will keep your knives and your pride and your right to be foolish when it does not cost other men's lives. You will give up your raids. You will say guest right in the mornings. You will watch a boy with a bell and not shame him for doing a man's work. You will do these things because the other choice is worse." He smiled without warmth. "You can tell yourself you chose the worse. Men like to make myths out of their stubbornness." The fox-faced man laughed and did not mean it. "We will come," he said, "because you blew the horn and my woman heard it in her bones and told me I was not a man if I did not listen to my bones. And because I do not like dreams when they walk in the day and the trees look at me as if they are counting." He looked at John then and bared his teeth. "But I will cut you if your men count my children." "Cut me," John said, "if we count them as anything but ours." That surprised the man into silence. which is a gift worth more than many gifts. They came, then, and kept coming, and the yard kept widening itself to fit them, not by feet, but by willingness. The wall groaned in its sleep and woke and groaned again, which is what old things do when you make them do new tasks. Sharefire grew. Its name began to be said with the particular sort of fondness a place earns when it feeds you once when you did not expect it to. Men began to say at Sharefire as if it had always existed. A boy bought a bone flute with a bent silver coin of a kind no one had seen in years, and when the seller asked where he had found it, he shrugged and said, "Under a stone," which is often where money hides in stories. One evening when the cold had found the hinge in John's knee and worried at it until he noticed, Val came to him with a look like a blade carried in a safe sheath. "Your men," she said, "have learned to look away and to look back. This is good. But some of your men look at me and see knives. I do not mind knives. I mind hands." They were boys taught to believe that all women are sisters and all sisters are saints, John said. Then they became men taught to believe that all women are temptations and all temptations are tests. They are learning that women are women. They are learning slowly, Val said, but her mouth softened. Slowness is a kind of caution. I like caution when it keeps my friends alive. Do you call me friend? John asked without meaning to make it sound like it mattered. I call you the man with the horn, she said. I will call you other things when you earn them. What things? He asked. She smiled, and there were teeth in it and no cruelty. Ayok, she said, and left him to think whether that was a promise or a willful compassion or both. The watcher came again on a night of hard stars. John felt him before he saw him, which is a strange sentence for a man to make true. He went to the top of the wall without calling for a cloak, which was foolish and made the cold punish him, which was also useful. Pain is a tutor, exact and cheap. The figure stood as if the wind had carved it there. It did not move. John did. He walked to the merlin above the gate and rested his hands on the stone. He imagined his breath a flag, one that meant, "We are here and we are not done." Behind him, boots crunched. Mance came to his left, silent as a man can be in snow when the snow knows him. To his right, Gior Mormont stood with the weight of his years on him like a cloak that would not slip. Between them, John felt like a rope tied between two strong posts, which is not an insult if you are the right kind of rope. What does it want? Mormont asked, not of anyone in particular. To see whether we will get tired, Mance said. To see whether the gate opens to us as it did to the people it hates, John said. To see whether the living remember how to be living, Mormont said, and there was something in his voice that made the ice listen. They stood a long while and nothing happened, which is sometimes the point. The dead do not tire, but they do have rhythms. Men can learn rhythms. Men can make their own. In the weeks that followed, the first of the free folk settled in the gift began to make the land look like it could be useful again. They cleared underbrush. They found old wells and made them pronounceable. They set up fences not to keep men out but to keep goats in. They argued at Sharefire and laughed and bought things they did not need because the act of buying a thing you do not need is an admission that you believe in a future where you might want it. A party went south to an abandoned village and found a store of iron nails in a chest under a bed where a woman had thought all dangers would look like men and none would look like time. They brought back the nails and a doll with one eye and a smell that made men remember their mother's hands without knowing why. Sam catalogued their haul with a joy that made the weeper call him Little Counter and ask him to weigh his jokes too. Sam weighed them and found them light, which made the weeper love him more. On a night when the moon was a thin coin and the wind was doing nothing helpful, John dreamed under the weirwood at Whitetree again. He dreamed of the roots running like white veins under the snow and of the dead thing at the treeline and of a horn he had not blown and would blow and of a word he would say in a room full of men who did not want to hear it and of a hand on his shoulder that felt like ice and heat both. He woke with the taste of sap in his mouth and ghost's fur under his hand and the idea that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the absence of the thing you want to say. The following day, Mother Mole's people came with a message that did not use words. They brought a net full of fish that had not frozen solid and laid it down near the pot and did not move until someone asked them why. Then a girl no older than 9 said, "This is for the ones who cannot fish because their hands have become bell hands," and smiled as if proud of the sentence, and John felt a thickness in his throat he did not blame on the cold. He sent them back with bread and with iron fishhooks and with a bell of their own. He told them how to hang it out of the wind so it would ring only when men made it ring. Mother Mole nodded, pleased, as if the exchange had made the world more symmetrical. "Men put bells on cows," she said. "This is the other way. Good." A storm came that made all the earlier storms look like practice. It arrived as a line on the horizon that could have been a low range of mountains and then grew and then leaped. The wind turned into a thing with many hands that wanted everything and asked for nothing. The wall sang. The ropes sang louder. Men moved as if they were in a remember when tale told by old men who always move men too quickly and forget that the cold makes your knees liars. Fires collapsed and were made again. The giants stood in the north yard with their backs to each other and made a ring around the old and the very young who had not learned to be afraid properly. Ghost vanished and reappeared and vanished like a white curse that loved what it plagued. The bells rang in order, which is a kind of miracle in a storm. 1 for ready, 2 for tighten, 3 for turn the leeward with your back and not your face, which was not any code Sam had written but one the yard had invented itself in a hurry and kept because it worked. In the middle of it, a shout went up that was not a shout. Steer had fallen from a wall walk and landed wrong, and his leg had become a question. He tried to stand on it because that is who he was and failed and did not swear. John and 2 men lifted him and he let them, which is the truest proof of friendship there is for a man like Steer. They took him to the common hall and set his leg as if it were a spear shaft with a crack, which is what bones are. He bit on leather and held Val's hand and did not pretend he was not in pain, which is a different kind of honesty. After, he turned his head and looked at John and said, "The oaths will be said," and closed his eyes as if he had just done a week's work by surviving. The storm passed like a bad temper a man has decided he cannot afford. It left the yard swept clean and strange. It left drifts like walls where walls did not need to be. It left a fire pit filled with snow that would not melt the same way snow melts elsewhere. It left men tired to the marrow and proud to the marrow, which share a bed. When the sky went hard blue after, the watcher came again, as if to count the cost. John went up with Mance and Mormont without summoning them because sometimes men go to the same place without a word because of the same thought. "What do we do when it comes in truth?" Mance asked, not to either of them, to the air that had seen more of this than they had and would see more after. "We do what we have done," Mormont said, "but faster." He looked at John. "And with fewer words." John nodded. He had fewer words left to begin with. He had used many and would use more and would owe some. He had a horn and was not done blowing it. He had a market with a name that tasted right. He had a woman who called him the man with the horn and would call him other things when he deserved them. He had a friend who read and built songs out of pegs and strings. He had a boy who heard ice and men who obeyed him without knowing they were obeying him. He had an enemy who came and went and did not smile. He had a beginning he had already used once. He would need it again. The free folk camps in the gift began to knit the land into smaller pieces that did not blow away when the wind tugged. Men pegged hides tight over frames and then built walls around those frames with stones pulled from fields that had forgotten why they had stones. Women planted potatoes in old ash and told the potatoes lies about summer. Children threw themselves at the snow and learned that it throws you back. Old men who had looked like driftwood learned to sit in sun they trusted enough to close their eyes under. A letter came from the south written on good paper with bad ink. It said a lord would be sending men to inquire whether the people who had always been enemies were now subjects and whether the Night's Watch intended to play at princes. John read it and took it to Gior, and they both looked at it and did nothing with it that day because the day had other work. The next morning, Gior answered it with a sentence. "We guard the realms of men." He added no names and sealed it with old wax that smelled like a chest at the bottom of a stair. He sent it and did not watch the raven go, which is a kind of courage too. At Sharefire, a woman sold combs carved from bone with little bears on the handles, and a man traded a song he had learned in a cradle and never sung because no one had asked. Mance listened and did not change the song, which is how you honor a cradle. Tormund got drunk and arm-wrestled a giant and lost and accused the giant of using his left hand, which was true, and made everyone laugh until they remembered their ribs hurt from chopping wood and stopped before they broke. Sam found a passage in Kennet's writing that said something about the singing stones north of Hardhome, a cliff that gave back notes truer than a bell, and that ships should use it when fog eats the sun to know where the mouth of the harbor is. He came and told Jon with his face alight, and Jon said, "We will hang a bell there when the thaw comes." And Sam said, "We will," and believed it as if bells could grow out of rock. On a night when the temperature dropped so quickly men could hear it as a kind of high, thin tone, Jon dreamed again. He stood in the circle at Sharefire with no people in it and only the fire, and the fire spoke in the old tongue without words, and it said neighbor but meant work, and it said work but meant love, and it said love and meant fire. He woke with soot on his fingers and no idea how it had got there, and Ghost licked his palm and tasted the dream and accepted it. He went to the forge and stood with the smith and did not speak until the man was done with the heat. "We will need smaller knives," Jon said. "We need larger everything," the smith said. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and left a clean streak there that made him look for a moment like a priest of some sensible god. "But I can make you small knives. For women, for children, for men whose hands have learned to be kind too long. For belt sheaths," Jon said, "to cut rope and meat, to cut dragonglass free when it wedges in bone, to cut your own shirt when it freezes to your skin and you need it not to." The smith nodded as if Jon had brought him water. "You get your wood and your men and your beasts and your gods," he said. "I will get you edge." In the yard, two boys practiced with bells instead of sticks. One would ring and the other would answer with the right hand to the right bell and then switch. It looked like a game. It was a game. It would be a memory they would use later, when the night took their names out of their own mouths and left them with only sounds, and the right ones would lead them home. Mance found Jon by the west gate, looking at a sky that had learned to be clear and was not flaunting it. He leaned on the stone as if it were a friend with a broad shoulder. "I have changed a thing I did not want to change," he said without preface. "You," Jon said, mock astonished in a way that made Mance chuckle. "The song I sing at night," Mance said. "I shortened it. I leave out the verse about the man who leaves his wife because he thinks it will make him larger. It is not a good verse to sing in a hall with men who are trying to stay beside the ones who warm them." "Practical," Jon said. "Practicality is the uglier cousin of art," Mance said. "But she keeps you fed." He looked at Jon. "When you die," he said gently, "men will tell a story about how you blew the horn and changed the world. They will forget the days you stood in the yard with a rope teaching a boy which end of a knot to hold. They will forget the smell of iron and onions. They will forget the bell that rang by itself and made you thank it. They will remember what they can sing. I will try to make them sing the truth." "I would rather live," Jon said. "Me too," Mance replied, and his smile was so tired it looked like wisdom. Night fell again and again. Men slept and woke and stood watch and went to share their bowls and then to their fights and then to their work. The watcher came and went. The dead moved like a word a man cannot pronounce until he hears it once and then he cannot stop saying it. The living learned a pace and then changed it and then learned a second that fit better. One dawn, the horn blew 3 long and 1 short without Jon's hand on it, because the boy at the bell had grown into a man who could hear before his own fear did. The gates opened, slow and enormous. The people who came through that day did not look like people who had been running. They looked like people who had decided to walk. They had a cart. In the cart was a weirwood sapling wrapped in canvas and humility. They set it down at Sharefire and uncovered it, and the whole yard went quieter than men normally allow themselves. Even Tormund remembered to stop breathing for a moment. Val knelt and put her palm to the pale bark as if touching a forehead. "You bring a god south," she said. "What made you think to do this?" The man who had pushed the cart shrugged. "Mother Mole said the gods are as lonely as men," he said. "We should not leave them there to talk to themselves." "Good," Val said, and meant it. Jon felt a thing uncurl in his chest that was not relief and not pride. It had a slow warmth that did not switch on like a lamp but built itself from its own wood. He looked up at the wall and the sky above it and the way the air moved along the edge. He felt the day begin the way a song begins when a man who has been humming his whole life finally sings the first word. He went to the gate. He stood where he had stood before and put the horn to his mouth and blew. The sound went into the air and into the ice and into the bones of men who had decided many things and into the bones of those who had decided nothing. And it said, again, what it had to say. It said open. It said come. It said neighbor. It said work. It said live. It carried farther this time, or else men's ears had become larger with practice. On the ridge beyond the far beacon, a figure turned its head very slowly and then did not move for a long time. John lowered the horn and let the echo sit in his teeth like a taste. He touched Ghost's ruff without looking down. He thought of Hardhome and the boats and the nets and tollers listening and Mother Mole's smile without teeth. He thought of the baby named No-Guest and the bell that rang and the storm that tried to teach them everything at once. He thought of Steer's leg and Val's Ayok and Mance's shortened song. He thought of men south who would send knives and coins and questions. He thought of the winter and the way it holds a grudge against anyone with warm blood. He thought, and then he stopped thinking because the day had work in it and needed hands more than it needed thoughts. He went down from the wall and into the yard and into the market and into the fights and into the oaths and into the sound of his own men learning to be the thing he had asked them to be. Begin, he said without saying, and the day did.